Hello everyone, it's Chantel from Crochantel, and welcome to this video where I will be showing you 15 different ways that you can use your yarn scraps. As you can see, I've collected an entire bag of yarn scraps, so I feel like it's time that I share my techniques on using up this yarn so it doesn't go to waste. So as you can see, I primarily have plush and chenille yarn, and that is because I make a lot of amigurumi pieces, but all of the tips that I will be sharing today will work for chenille yarn, wool yarn, acrylic, whatever you like to use. So first up, in the spirit of amigurumi, one of my favorite ways to use up my yarn scraps, especially the smaller pieces, is to use them as stuffing in replace of polyfill. This way you can first of all reduce your waste, and you are also finding a way to use those smaller pieces because it's oftentimes really difficult to know what to do with a 2-inch strand of yarn. This is also a great way in case you're kind of opposed to using things like polyfill, the plastic stuffing. You can use your wool blend yarns instead as a replacement. And then my second idea, which is also in the stream of amigurumi, is to use your scrap yarn as detailing. I used some white acrylic yarn here for the hockey puck that I have made, and I used it just to pop the eyes a bit more on the hockey puck. You can also use your scrap black yarn for smiles. You can use different colored yarns for face detailing. I've done a lot of projects that needed stripes and where I only needed a small amount for that detailing. As you can see here, even with some of the other pieces that I have next to me, this yarn chicken, I just needed a small amount of yellow for the beak. Same with this penguin, just a small amount of yellow. It's great to have these sort of things on hand, and you're probably going to have them regardless in your yarn scrap storage. And then moving on to number 3, I would recommend starting to build out a yarn dictionary. So what this is just having a complete collection of all of the yarns that you use most frequently and naming the color, the brand, the yarn weight, and your general rating on it. I have most commonly see people just hole punch a page and then tie the yarn around that hole punch. Then it's a perfect way to, first of all, use up your yarn scraps and better keep a log on the yarn that you love to use. And then moving on to number 4, seeing as it's starting to get colder out, is to use your scrap yarn as pom-poms. Here I used some scrap yarn to make a mock pom-pom for this penguin, but especially if you have a lot of acrylic yarn, you can make multicolored pom-poms and a whole bunch of other options. And then moving on to number 5 is making tassels. So you can attach these tassels to things such as bookmarks, bags, keychains, and more. And all it is taking your yarn scraps and wrapping a tiny knot and just making sure all the ends are cut even. It can give a really professional finish to your crochet pieces, and I'd highly recommend considering this, especially if you have a large amount of acrylic yarn or if you want to add a fancy edge to a project like a blanket. And then moving on to number 6, it is keeping the yarn on hand for color work. So you may be wondering, what does that mean? Well, in some projects, you will only need a small amount of a certain color for the crochet piece. For example, as you can see, I only needed a bit of red for the mouth of this screaming yeti. So that would be the perfect opportunity to take some of your yarn scraps and use it for a project. Especially if you're into crochet pieces such as tapestries where there's a lot of color changes, having these yarn scraps on hand can be super helpful when you need that one small bit of color for just a couple of stitches. And then moving on to number 7, this one will be very useful to the crochet business owners out there, and that is using your leftover yarn scraps for hang tags. So all you will do is take a small strand of yarn, tie it onto the tag that you have your information and pricing on, and then attaching it to your finished crochet piece. This can really help stay in the realm of crochet and give a more personal touch to each of your crocheted pieces at a vendor show or in consignment. And it's a perfect way to use up your leftover yarn scraps. Then for number 8, it is using your yarn scraps as ribbon. This can be a great way, especially with the festive season coming up, to use up your yarn scraps in a very kind of aesthetic way. I find that certain acrylic yarns can look super beautiful when packaged correctly, especially wool blends too. If you just have a small box and instead of going out and buying more ribbon that you're just going to throw away anyways, you might as well use your yarn scraps that you already have on hand. And then for number 9, I know lots of my crochet friends use this technique. That is to use your yarn scraps as a stitch marker. I know lots of people end up losing their actual stitch markers, the plastic ones that they buy. So you might as well use yarn scraps that you already have on hand. It'll save you money and it'll save you wasting potentially large amounts of plastic by using your yarn instead. And then for number 10, I would highly recommend that if you have a lot of yarn scraps, kind of like me, you should try to donate them. You could donate them either to your local charity shops or even to a school or daycare. Lots of schools and daycares do a lot of art classes with their younger kids, and having a large quantity of yarn come in can be really helpful for them, especially for different arts and crafts. Or even if you have your own children, consider using the yarn scraps for some interesting crafts. Number 11, and this is for my crocheters who are also into quilting, is to use some of your yarn scraps as batting. So similar to using it as polyfill, you will use it instead in replacement of the stuffing that you would typically use when making your quilt. Just sprinkling a thin layer of yarn between your fabric pieces and then making unique quilting designs over top can be a really great way to use your yarn scraps, especially ones that may not look so aesthetic or ones that you don't want to use anymore. You want to have it hidden, you can use it as batting so no one has to see, but it still serves a great purpose. And for number 12, I don't know why it took me until number 12 to say this one, but you can use your yarn scraps for small granny squares. There are so many different projects that you can make with a granny square, so using up these leftover scraps can help you make a whole pile of granny squares and eventually make something like a bag, a blanket, a sweater, you name it, you can end up making one out of your yarn scraps. So it will serve a purpose and you'll be able to brush up on your granny square making skills. And for number 13, you can use your yarn scraps in a way that most crocheters wouldn't even consider using them. That is to use them in yarn wrapping activities. You can get a styrofoam cone from the dollar store. Taking some green scrap yarn, you can glue and wrap the yarn around the cone and make a Christmas tree. There's so many different ways you can do this, and realistically you wouldn't be able to crochet a Christmas tree with that amount of yarn, so being able to repurpose it in a way that will serve your home is a great purpose for your scrap yarn. Then for number 14 is to keep your yarn on hand as a lifeline. I can almost guarantee that at some point you have lost to the evil yarn chicken and you have been left with not enough yarn on hand. So keeping your yarn scraps just in case can be a great way to make sure that you have that little bit of extra white yarn to finish off your project. And speaking of yarn chicken, coming into number 15 is to make your own yarn chicken. You don't necessarily have to make your own yarn chicken, even though I think it's such an amazing and unique and funny pattern to have. You can use up your yarn scraps to just make the projects that you already love and just have it in a more unique colorway. If you're making a garment, you may have a lot of ends to weave in, but with things like amigurumi, you don't have to worry about weaving your ends as all the ends are inside the plushie. So just be open to the idea of crocheting pieces that you already know and love, and just consider having different colorways in this. So maybe collecting a bunch of green yarns and making a sweater out of your scrap green, or using an assortment of rainbows, you can make a rainbow yarn chicken. The possibilities are endless. It's one of the easiest ways to use up your yarn scraps. Thank you so much for watching this video, and if you enjoyed, please consider subscribing for more content such as this. And if you're interested in any of the patterns that I have next to me, details on where to find them are all available in the description. Please let me know in the comments if you have any requests on other crochet FAQs or any other tips and tricks that you'd like me to share. Once again, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.